Good morning, everybody. I've got a message for the American people and all you cops out there across America. Here's the message. You're being lied to. You're being used by the for-profit corporations that you work for, masquerading around as legitimate constitutional governments, because they're telling you every day to go right out as law enforcement officers and violate due process and the inherent constitutionally secured rights of the people. The American citizen, folks, has the inherent, that's God-given, right to travel over the public roads, unencumbered, free from law enforcement. This fundamental right to travel is so fundamental that the framers of this constitutional republic didn't specifically enumerate it in the Bill of Rights, but it is covered under the 9th Amendment and the 5th Amendment. The freedom, the constitutional guarantees protected under our document are there. You can go read them. Okay? The Articles of Confederation, Article 4, Section 1. You can see very specifically where the American people, the American citizen, has the fundamental right to travel. It's also in the Declaration of Independence. The United States Supreme Court, folks, has ruled over and over and over again about this fundamental right to travel and that the American people have an inherent right to do so, free and unencumbered from what? From law enforcement. They've done it so many times that they have what the lawyers are calling stare decisis on it. In other words, it's settled law at the United States Supreme Court. So we have an inherent right to travel. Well, where do these cops get off writing all these tickets and searching your vehicles and doing what they do out there in America today? It's because the American people, including the cops, have been lied to. They are told on a daily basis that the average American citizen has to have a driver's license, insurance, and registration to get on the public roads. Folks, that, as I've just described, is a lie. The only time that the American citizen, which is just a small percentage, has to have a driver's license, registration, and insurance is when they're engaged in a commercial activity called driving. What's that look like? What's a driver? A driver in the United States Code Title 49 is described as one employed. Also, Black's Law Dictionary, the 4th edition. Go look at it. You'll find it. One employed doing what? Driving a motor vehicle, transporting goods or passengers over the public road for a fee or a fare. You see, if you're an Uber driver or a limo driver, a bus driver, you're hauling passengers over the road. You're making your living that way, aren't you? Yeah, exactly. If you're an operator of an 18-wheeler and you're hauling goods across the interstate, you're getting paid by the mile, aren't you? Okay, now you're engaged in commerce. You're what we call a driver. Okay? You fall under the traffic regulatory scheme. Now you have to have a license, registration, and insurance, and you got to follow all the statutes and codes. Everybody else out there, which is what, 90% of the rest of America, you're not hauling passengers or cargo for a fee or a fare. You're not in a commercial capacity. You're a traveler in your private business affairs in your private automobile. And that can be for personal or your own private business. You're not subject to the transportation regulatory scheme. Do you understand that distinction? Well, that's true. So when you get pulled over by a so-called law enforcement officer, remember this, that in our nation, we were founded as a constitutional republic, which means individual liberty, okay? When you're pulled over for a traffic violation, if there's no actual crime that was committed with an actual flesh and blood man or woman victim, then it's not a crime. You understand that? It's not a crime because you're not operating in commerce. You're in your private business affairs. That officer that's at your window, and you cops need to listen up, you've taken an oath to the Constitution to uphold due process of law and recognize the guaranteed, secured, inherent rights of the people. When you pull somebody over and you don't have an actual crime where there's a flesh and blood victim, or there's not a direct threat to public safety, then you've perjured your oath. And by doing so, you've committed an insurrection. You're warring against the Constitution. Any immunity that you perceive that you have as a law enforcement officer, because that's what you've been told by the city attorney or your boss, is out the window. And when you pull a guy like me over who knows what the law is and knows what his rights are, then I'm going to hold you personally responsible in your personal capacity for treason. Because that's what you've done. You've committed treason. You've operated outside of the lawful scope and authority given to you by the people through that oath. Article 6, Clause 2 and 3. So it's high time the American people need to stand up and take peaceful, lawful effective action against these corporations and demand that our constitutional republic be restored. Hey, look, I'm just some wide-headed old crank from Central Illinois. Don't take my word for it. Maybe you should do this, Mr. Law Enforcement Officer, or Mr. and Mrs. America. Why don't you set your college brackets down for a damn minute, get off your ass, and listen to what I just said, replay this video, and go back and check for yourself if what I'm saying is true. Because here's the reality of the situation, folks. We're this close to completely losing our nation. We're that close. We have to stand up as Americans. And the right to travel is just a small piece of the lie that we've been fed for decades and decades. The American people have no clue who they are. They have no clue what their rights are. They have no clue who the enemy even is. If we don't stand up today, folks, and take effective, peaceful, lawful action against these for-profit corporations masquerading around as legitimate constitutional governments, then I don't want to hear any bitching and moaning and crying later when guys like me, people like you, are in concentration camps and your kids are living under abject Stalinism, because we're almost there.